College football nerds here to talk Arizona State and Utah. And this is kind of a model-only discussion, just numbers on this one. We did a ton of content this week. There's a lot of games that we watched this last weekend. And even though we've seen Arizona State and Utah play a good bit, we didn't want to do a full preview of this game because we haven't been able to see them enough the last couple of weeks for where we felt comfortable to kind of put our name on something like we normally do with our really in-depth previews. But we also didn't want to go this whole week without mentioning this game a little bit because it's so important. I believe it might be one of two, maybe three ranked matchups. So without further ado, I'm going to send it over to Josh. He can talk about the model and get into the numbers. Thanks, y'all.
As he said, we mainly wanted to focus on the model and get you guys a little bit of content. So our model, being that Arizona State fans and Utah fans probably haven't heard us a ton, it's a per-play based model. So we look at per-play stats, how you did against your opponents. It looks at per-play stats, how your opponents did against everyone else. Builds a profile of how good your team is relative to your opponents and relative to competition level from each. Purely compensating for the level or quality of your opponents. From there, it kind of gets an idea of how you're likely to do in this game relative to each other's strengths and weaknesses. Builds a prediction of what this game's going to kind of play out in a yardage and production sense. And then it looks at your own past history and your past games to see how your scoring was affected by your production in a given game. Every team is different in the yardage that's required to score. Every team's different in how that yardage scales and how different things affect them. Some teams can get easy or cheap points due to turnovers or special teams. A lot of teams get points in that regard, by the way, and people say, oh, did you factor in turnovers or interceptions? But it's often not a predictable thing. You mean maybe you get some points that way, but you don't get it on a weekly basis to where you can depend on it. But quite frequently, you'll see with a pro-style offense, they'll need more like 8 yards of play to really work at a high level to get 40 points. Spread offenses can often get more points from lower yardage. But you also see with a spread offense in particular, if it falls below a certain threshold, if you're getting 4 yards per play or worse, you won't score anything. Whereas a pro style can often get you 17 points with almost no production. Moving on from there, when we look at all our scoring and how these games are going, the production's pretty simple. Percentages allowed. So Arizona State and Utah allow, respectively, 79% of opponent rushing averages and 63% of opponent rushing averages, Arizona State versus Utah. Arizona State allows 98% of opponent passing averages, Utah 88%. It's a lot easier to hold a team to a lower rush number than pass number. You see rush numbers get in the 40s and 50s. Indeed, Penn State's in the 40%, 46%, I think, this week. Pass defense is never that low. There's a reason why passing offenses dominate in the NFL and they dominate in the playoffs. We see it week to week in our model with this simple statistic that for some reason no one else uses, and that is the fact that passing offenses tend to score at least 75% of their production against everybody. Even the best defenses can't hold anybody below 70%, whereas the best defense will cut your run production in half. Looking at these numbers, we often say 95% is the real average here because everybody's got some Northern Illinois on their schedule that boost your numbers because you did really well against those teams. That makes your overall season average higher than it should be. So holding a team to 100% of their averages means you're holding them to the mix of a Pac-12 team and their out-of-conference teams rather than 95% is a little closer to the average Pac-12 team. Arizona State is a good run defense. 79% is a very good number. Not necessarily elite. I think I reserve elite for below 75% where Utah's at. 98% by Arizona State and the pass defense is not a great number. That is very average, maybe even mediocre. 88% by Utah is actually a rather good number. I would say, again, anything below 95% is good. Anything below 90 is very good. Utah has a very good pass defense. Arizona State does not. And that kind of ends up being the story of the game when you look at our model and its predictions. Arizona State offensively is projected to have about 2.5 yards per carry. That's it. Utah has a good run defense. 7.7 yards per attempt. 7.5 yards per attempt is what we consider to be competent passing game, but anything below 3 yards per attempt is ineffective in the run. 4.9 yard per play predicted. That's not a straight average. It's more based off tendencies from each team. Utah offensively is predicted to be 4.2 yards per carry. 4.5 is where I consider it to be productive, but 4 yard per carry or above is solid run game. 9.6 yards per attempt. And that's pretty much the whole game right there. That's a very effective passing offense at 6.3 yard per play. Again, that's not just an average. It takes into account that Utah is a more run-heavy offense. In fact, about 3-2. Arizona State here is predicted to lose. It has Utah 30, Arizona State 17. Again, pretty simple. I think if you were to ask me to flesh out things that are my potential weaknesses in the model in this regard, I would say really the biggest thing is the fact that the passing statistics from either team might be a touch off. And when I say that, I mean when you look at Utah's passing statistics at 10.3 yard per attempt, which is very good, it's been up or down. BYU was 6.5, Southern Cal was 7, and then you're at like 13.7 against Oregon State, which is a crazy number. Northern Illinois is 11. Washington State, who's a bad defense, is 11.1. I'm not sure that 10.3 yards per attempt is really reflective of where the offense is. It is probably much closer to a 7.5, 8 yard per attempt average had you played better defense over the course of the year. But Arizona State is no different. 11.8 yards per attempt against Kent State, 10.1 against Washington State. No, we don't consider the FCS game against Sacramento State. And then you got like Michigan State there at 5.4 yard per attempt, dragging it down. I can't say for a fact that Utah would look any differently had they played Michigan State. However, I will say this. We are not that high on Michigan State offensively or defensively. Michigan State obviously just got blanked 38-0 by Wisconsin. They got beaten 34-13 by Ohio State. Ohio State's a great team. I get that. But one of the takeaways here is that Michigan State is not Michigan State of the past few years where they could shut somebody down. So that's a little bit why you have cause for concern with Arizona State. Our model sees that. That's why it's at 17 points. So our prediction, 30-17. And I'm not going to give a prediction being that it's a model-only video. We don't do that in model-only. I will state that the lines just came out after we made the model. We don't use the line in the model, though we make the model before the line comes out generally. The model is 13 points, and the spread is 13.5 Utah. So our prediction is right in line with it. If you want to know why Vegas is where it is, it may not be exactly the rationale we just gave, but everything we just said lines up with Vegas, and a 30-17 win for Utah in a game where Arizona State just doesn't move the ball that well, and Utah has a lot of success in the year.
For me, just real quick, everybody's going to look at the transitive property game with Washington State, but the one that scares me more is the Michigan State game based on what we've learned about Michigan State since that game. They're not very good, and I think Arizona State, to their credit, finds a way to beat the bad teams, to be better than the bad and the average teams. But I think Utah's a good team, and I don't necessarily think they're going to win this one. All right, y'all, thanks so much for hanging out with us for a model-only review. And as we get further down into this season, hopefully we'll have some more opportunities to get into that Pac-12 kitchen a little more. Thanks so much. Y'all have a great week, and God bless.